I hope you had I hope you had a good day. And I am finishing this day with this presentation, but I had four couple therapy sessions today, and I was also teaching at Newport College, and I'm really excited to meet you. And this will be the crown at the end of this day that we do here together. So the topic is the fine print of love till trauma do us part. And where the topic came from was a conversation with a lady whom I haven't met for a while. And then we just stumbled in each other, literally, after maybe 2, 3 years of not seeing each other. But before that, we saw each other quite often at different occasions on different marriage enrichment seminars and events. She came always with her husband, and she was always very eager to learn and put everything in practice what she learned with her husband. But then, as we met, she felt kind of an urge to explain why she disappeared. And then she said, the reason we disappeared is that in the end, we just didn't make it. After a long struggle, I decided to get a divorce. For a long time, I couldn't talk to you about it because I was angry with you. Every time we met, every one of your talks reminded me of how much of a mess we are. I couldn't bear to face that reflection, and since we couldn't change, I ended up being angry at the mirror instead. Ooh, I must tell you, this was a very shocking conversation for me. I was deeply touched by her words, and I was also very sad to hear that they broke up eventually. But it was also very strange that how can somebody reach to this point who regularly attends seminars, who reads books, and does visibly everything to save their marriage? And at the end, she was angry with me, although I have just tried to help her to recover from all those crises that they went into their marriage. And this was something very similar, like what I wrote in an old book of the brilliant psychologist and philosophist and communication researcher Paul Václavic. He wrote a book back in 1983 about unhappiness, the guide to unhappiness. Of course, this was a very strange title for a book, and he described how he chose this title for his book with the following words: the world is drowning in books about happiness. That's why I wrote a guide to unhappiness. One of my biggest inspirations was the book titled The Ideal Marriage, he said, where every page reminded me of how pathetic and miserable my own marriage was. So this is a very strange phenomena here that we see. People who are struggling with their own marriage are becoming more and more angry at those who seem to have a well-functioning, good relationship. And maybe this is something that you meet too in your own respective countries and your own ministry. You try to do your best for the people you serve, and then they end up being angry with you. What is wrong here? You didn't do anything wrong to them, but they suffered from something that they maybe never revealed to you. So, what if you are very intentional? Oh, somebody makes some drawings to the picture here. If you're very intentional with your own relationship, if you work on it, you even go to therapy, you educate yourself, you read books, and yet the results are not what you hoped for. What can be in the background of this struggle, of this issue? Well, I need to tell you in advance, we all are somehow traumatized. We all carry wounds and scars in our lives that need to be handled somehow and which have a very visible impact on the way how we maintain our most important human relationships. We can have different approaches, but we end up with similar results. As the theologians, in the ecclesiastical approach, we say this can be the impact of sin. Whether is it the original sin, an inherited sin, which not even we committed, but our parents, our grandparents, our grand-grandparents, or it can be impact of our own sins. We made wrong choices, and the state in which we are right now, in which we are caught as a couple, can be the result of sin. Just as David described in Psalm 51, surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Well, sin covers us. It surrounds us wherever we are. Even before we were born in sin, which doesn't mean necessarily that we committed that sin. Maybe our parents, but we are surrounded by it and we cannot escape from its impact. And sometimes this impact comes out in our most important relationships, like marriage, like parenting. And if we look to the same issue through the glasses of psychology, we can mention the term of trauma. Trauma is something that is often used here as a description for something that is hidden in the background. Actually, the world rediscovered the term as the Rambo movies came out. I'm sure you are all familiar with Sylvester Stallone and Rambo, who was a soldier coming just home from the Vietnam War. He was a veteran, and he was humiliated during the war, and he suffered really hell on earth. And now he comes back home, and there's a police officer who is very harsh with him, and this triggers him with a flashback of all the horrors that he endured during the war. And this leads him to a violent outburst. Since these movies, we know again what it means to suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. In the everyday terms, a trauma is something that we experienced in the past, but which has a very touchable impact in the present. I read a strange article in a German magazine, Frankfurter Allgemeine, which said, we live such an overloaded life right now that was considered psychiatrically abnormal in the 1950s and is considered as normal now. We carry so much scars and wounds that we are so much burdened that we all should have therapy for our scars and our traumas. There is a very famous trauma researcher, Gabor Mate, who is a Hungarian and very renowned worldwide. He says that all those people who suffered some kind of trauma in their childhood, they will have to face that life will submit its bills. And there are three areas of life where the impact of traumas will come up: relationship blockages, individual psychological issues, and those recurring patterns that you see in somebody's life, like he or she is dancing the same dance over and over again, but can't get rid of it. This all can be an impact of being traumatized as a child, as a teenager, or even in the current relationship, in the current marriage. And I like the way how Sue Johnson formulates when she is talking about the way how these traumatic experiences are coming to life in the current relationship. She says, when the primal panic kicks in, we generally react in two ways. Either we become demanding, trying to get comfort and reassurance from our partner, or in order to protect our own calm and well-being, we withdraw and distance ourselves. So if you have a couple in your ministry, or you recognize the same pattern maybe in your own relationship, in your own way to react on a crisis situation, then you can assume that there can be maybe some traumatic experience in the background. Two signs for that. One, you become very demanding and you start hitting the table. I want this and this. I need that. You need to do this and this for me. Or the opposite, you become very quiet, like a snail. You withdraw into your protection house and you just wait that the clouds go away and then you come out again. These can all be signs of some unprocessed traumatic life experiences that you suffered in your past. So, how can we define what really a trauma is? This is my own definition that I like to use. Trauma is a strong negative emotional impact that influences us in the long term. It can be something that we actively experienced, like abuse or an accident, or it can be something that we just passively experience, like neglect, abandonment. So it can be something that somebody very actively did, or also that somebody should have done something, maybe to protect us, but they failed to do it. It can be momentary, it can be one thing in one moment, and it can be also a long-lasting thing. Somebody could have been abused for a number of years, and this is something that our emotional memory saves as a trauma, and it comes back and back, just like the lava out of a volcano in a certain unexpected situation. I like also the description how trauma works in time. Trauma is a strong negative emotional impact, maybe in the present, that questions the past and rewrites the future we had planned until then. Let me give you one example. Every time I work with couples who have some issue with infidelity, I see that they really suffer a trauma right now. In fact, being cheated on is one of the biggest traumatic experiences that an adult person can experience. It is something that impacts them right here, right now, in the present, but it rewrites the past because the victim of a betrayal starts thinking, okay, I was cheated on for the last 2 years, but what was 5 years ago when we went to holidays and he just disappeared in the hotel room and he said that has some digestion issues and he can't come out. Was he already then chatting with that other lady? It rewrites the past and you start questioning those things that you were quite sure about till now. And then it also rewrites all those images that you have in your mind about your future. Maybe you had that dream in your mind that at the age of 70, we will just sit there at the fireplace in our living room, holding each other's hands and watching our grandchildren playing in the middle of the room on the floor. And we will just be there and enjoying our fulfilled life. And now this image explodes in the split of a second. So there is a traumatic experience that is happening here in the present, and it destroys the past and it questions the future. This is what trauma does to us. Coming back to Gabor Mate, we see that a traumatic experience will be recognizable in our adult life in three different areas: in relationship blockages, individual psychological issues, and recurring patterns that we repeat over and over again. It goes so far that even Gabor Mate says, well, I figured out what text I would like to have on my tombstone when I'm going to die, because he suffered a severe trauma as well as a young boy with Jewish origin. I didn't think it would be this hard. This should be the text on his tombstone, he said, because trauma is something that follows us through our whole life. We can deal with it, but we can't erase it from our personal history. We can learn to live together with it, but we need to be always aware that it can be activated at any time. This is what trauma does to us. And when we experience something traumatic, we start asking questions like, what should I do now? I see now the result of a traumatic experience, but should I change now? Should I change my attitude, my behavior? Am I true to myself if I change, or am I true to myself if I don't change? I don't change is one direction I can go. Those who love me, they should love me just the way as I am, for who I am. If I change, I will no longer be myself. So I owe to myself to stick to the person I am and reject every urge of change. Or am I true to myself if I change? Because who I am now is the result of my traumas, but not what I was meant to be. I will be my true self if I change. Let us see a case study. These are real life examples. I was working with a couple where the husband explained me his situation like follows. Let's call them Susan and John. They are seeking couples therapy because of constant arguments over John's flirtatious behavior and his attention-seeking actions with other women. In defense, he says, my father left me when I was 3 years old. My mother was always working, so she never had time for me. I have chronic recognition deficiency that I need to make up for now. I love my wife, but I have to flirt with other women too. She just needs to accept this because this is who I am. Well, it's obvious. His current behavior, which is about to destroy his marriage right now, comes from an early childhood traumatic experience. He was neglected. He was left alone by his father. He saw him maybe 10 years later. They never had a well-functioning relationship with the father. The mother was never there because somebody needed to work to keep this family alive. And he needs attention, 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 attention. So, what is his true self? He said, this is who I am. If I change, I lose myself. So I owe to myself not to change. This is who I am. And then our work in our couples therapy started in the area that, is it really his true self who he is right now? And we came to the conclusion, no. This is his distorted self, distorted by the traumatic experience that he made as a child. So rather of rejecting every urge of change, he should give some place for change, because this is the only way he can go back to his true self, whom he meant to be, who was the original plan of his creator to become. And who is he is right now is a distorted version of him. If he wants to be really true to himself, he needs to change. Because while he lives out the results of his traumatic experiences, he is right now traumatizing his wife. And being traumatized does not give you any authorization to traumatize another person. You need to deal with your traumas. And of course, it is a very difficult thing to do. Like Paul says in Romans 7:18-20, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. It's a battle. It's a real war situation that is going on the inside. Either I change or I get a divorce. This comes as the result of it. I have to change in order to keep my marriage. And if I reject to change as a traumatized person, the temptation is so big to step out of the marriage, which always confronts me with my scars and wounds from the past, and to look around, maybe I could be happier with somebody else. I have an image in my mind that helps me and helped a lot of people to imagine how this works. Let's imagine marriage like two cakes. Those who know me know that I like sweet things. I love cakes. So I am a cake, a full round cake, and my wife is a cake too. But these are very tricky cakes here. These cakes are made of different kinds of slices. There is one chocolate cake, there is one fruit cake, there is one, I don't know what kind of cake, and these cakes are constantly rotating. I love chocolate cake. And in the time when I met my wife, her slice of chocolate cake was towards my slice of chocolate cake. We met each other, we fell in love with each other, and we thought, oh, that person probably has all of the slices just with chocolate cakes. And we fell in love, we started our relationship, and then as time goes by, we rotate, and it turns out that she has also other slices, some slices which I don't like. Oh, that's surprising. I thought that all of her slices are made of chocolate. So what should I do now? Meanwhile, there are other cakes around as well, around us, and they are also rotating. And out of the blue sky, there comes somebody who is with her chocolate cake towards me. And she gives me the false impression that probably all of her slices are made of chocolate. And I go out of my marriage and I start bonding with somebody else. That's a trap, because everybody is made of different slices of cakes. Everybody will have those slices in their personality which I don't like. I don't like those slices. And then I end up finding myself in a situation that it is too late to redo the things. I should have learned in my first marriage already that there are different slices, and I need to learn to accept this person how she or he is. And this is the mistake that many people do who are traumatized. I don't want to change. I stick to the person who I am because this is my real self. And if you don't accept me the way as I am, I need to change. I need to change you for somebody else. I will find a new person. Let us see another case study. In this second case study, let's call them Martha and Daniel. Martha grew up in an emotionally distant family. No matter how much she cried or sought support, she had to learn that she could only rely on herself. She closed herself off emotionally and never allowed herself to depend on anyone. She says, I was a lonely little girl. My parents were busy with building the house, and then with my little brother, I learned that I can only rely on myself. And I still live like that as an adult. I don't need to be pampered. I solve my own needs. However, my husband needs constant coddling, and that's not who I am. Well, the husband, Daniel, he was mocked at school for his speech impediment, which led to a sense of insecurity. He could only neutralize this insecurity through constant external validation. How can a woman who resolves everything on her own and never wants to depend on anyone live happily with a man who constantly needs her support? Looks like a catch-22. And many people see divorce as the only possible resolution. But as we mentioned, the cakes are rotating. And what seems as a good resolution from a crisis situation will turn out even worse than the first crisis was. And this is also proven by the divorce statistics. Nearly half of first marriages end up in a divorce. Let's say 50%, depending on the specific countries. But when it comes to second divorces, the second marriages, the divorce rate is already 10% higher. 60% of second divorces, of second marriages end up in divorce. Third marriages, 70%. It becomes the probability of a divorce grows by 10% in every next marriage. So why not to deal with the issue at the first marriage? And we can spare so much of extra work and effort if people would just know this. The lesson is clear. Everyone, including you and me, is traumatized to some extent. No matter how well our parents raised us, none of us are without scars. Where two wounded people live together, challenges will arise that need to be overcome. And divorce doesn't solve anything, as the same challenges will appear in the relationship, in the new relationship as well. I had a client, a man, who was stumbling from one relationship to the other. And after many, many relationships, he finally learned the lesson and he said, I finally found the common thread in all of my failed relationships. Well, what is that? Then he said, it's me. It doesn't matter if I change the partner. I am the same. And that's the reason why all of my relationships fail. So let us see a summary of what we can do if we recognized that we have these wounds and scars from our past. Probably our spouses have them too. I am not responsible for what I had to endure as a child. I am a victim of that. I never chose to experience this. I never asked for it. It happened to me. But I am responsible for what I do with it as an adult. I have power over this. I have power to make good decisions right now, in the present. I didn't have any power over those things that happened to me as a child. I was a victim of that. But I have a choice right now. And there are a number of things that I can do in the present. Let us see some of these. I collected altogether 6 of these points. And this is what with I would like to conclude my presentation. First of all, self-acceptance and self-love. Acknowledging that we are not responsible for our past, but we are responsible for how we handle it in the present is an empowering acknowledgement. This mindset helps shift focus from victimhood to agency, fostering personal growth despite past trauma. I can learn to love myself the way as I am. I can accept myself. In other words, this is the only realistic choice that I have. How can I expect another person to love me if I am not able to love myself? How can I expect another person to accept me if I am not willing to accept myself? Like Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, which means I am able in that measure to love the other person in which measure I am able to love myself, even with my scars and wounds from my personal past. The second thing I can do is to exercise compassionate love toward my partner. Sue Johnson's insight on trauma healing through positive relationships underscores the importance of supportive, empathetic connections. She says, no one has a bigger power over the traumatic experiences of a wife who wakes up in the middle of the night crying like a husband's hug in the middle of the deepest night when all of these bad memories are activated again. This is the biggest power on earth in that moment. Compassionate love towards my partner and monitoring my inner processes. What is going on the inside of me? We can learn to observe ourselves like we would be some spectators of a game. I had a very strange experience with my brother. It was just 2 weeks after the Ukrainian war broke out. He was at home. He lives and works in the UK, and I was driving him back to the airport, and we were talking in the car, and in the background, the radio just broadcasted the news, and in the news, they said that the Ukraine has closed its borders because they are recruiting all men between the age of 16 and 60, and they don't want to allow men to leave the country, so they have enough soldiers for the battlefield. And in that moment, as we heard that news, both of us started to cry. We didn't know what is going on right now. The tears were just running out, and we couldn't stop them. And I was looking at him. Come on, bro, what is going on with you? He looked back at me. I don't know, bro. What is going on with you? You do the same. Tell me. You are the psychologist. Do something. And then we started just observing ourselves. What is going on here? And I didn't have to think very long. The memories, these flashback moments came back in the split of a second, and I realized I was deeply moved by these news because I experienced the very same thing at the age of 18 in a country called Yugoslavia. A war broke out, and they wanted me to go to the battlefield to fight for a war which I had nothing to do with. And at the age of 18, I need to take part in the funeral of one of my best friends who was shot in that war, which was a deep traumatic experience. And now in the present, something happened that is very similar to that experience, and it awaked that memory in a moment. And my reaction, my natural reaction to this was, I started to cry, and I barely could control my crying, monitoring my inner processes. What is going on inside of me right now? Why do I react on something in that special way? What does it touch inside of me? Number 4, expressing my inner processes to my partner. Just what I did with my brother back then, sitting in the car, driving towards the airport. You know what is happening in me right now? I see myself at the age of 18 standing at the grave of one of my best friends who had 38 shots in his body. And I saw his father getting fully white haired in one day, a young man turning to an old man in one day, experiencing the death of his son. And all these memories came up in me in that moment as I was listening to the news. Number 5, expressing my needs and asking for them to be met. Knowing and expressing our needs can prevent resentment from building up. It's important to differentiate between demands and requests. I have no rights to demand something from my wife, but I have the right to ask her to do something in my favor. Understanding that while our partner may not always be able to meet our needs, clear communication increases the chances of receiving the support we seek. My wife experienced something similar, but she's not the same person as I am. How could she read my mind? How could she know what I need in that moment? Unless I tell her. Then she can decide for herself is whether or not she is willing to fulfill my need, which I need right now when my traumatic experience comes up in me. And number 6, which is for me one of the most significant ones, living with unresolved issues. This is who I am. There is a good chance that this will never be healed in my soul, at least not before Jesus comes back. This is something that I will carry through my whole life. But this is part of who I am. And I love this guy. I accept this guy the way he is. So I learn to live together with all these unresolved issues. And yes, from time to time, there will be events in my life when these traumatic experiences are getting activated. So what? It's part of my life. It's part of who I am. But if I love myself, if I accept myself, if I am able to monitor my inner processes, and if I have learned to express this to my wife as well, that she sees what is going on inside of me, then we can learn to live together, even with these deep, unresolved issues. These points all contribute to a healthy, transformative approach to relationship struggles, advocating for growth, communication, and healing instead of avoidance and resignation. They encourage a deep, loving connection based on mutual understanding and responsibility. Thank you so much for your attention.